So what's next for Joe Walsh? What will his life after the Eagles be like? Will we see him again on stage? Maybe one more album release on a solo tour? Or will he just sling his guitar over his shoulder and go home? A lot of questions, a lot of rumors. But no matter what he does, he won't be forgotten. That I'm 100% sure of. One thing to consider is, Joe had a life and a career before he ever joined the Eagles. Maybe to some of you, I'm pushing it here, saying Joe was a rock star before he became associated with the Eagles. But thinking back to the late 60s and early 70s growing up, most everyone who listened to and played rock music knew the name Joe Walsh. When it was announced that he was joining the Eagles in late 1975, they were already a well-established band. But then again, Joe was also a well-established star, in my opinion. He was the only true rock star the Eagles ever had. Joe always said he joined the Eagles because he was tired of being a solo act. In 1975, it was time for him to do another album, and he said he just didn't have any songs he liked or wanted to record. So he joined the Eagles, and then they created Hotel California. And 2 years later, they got off another studio album and then broke up. What did Joe do then? Well, he said from what he remembers, he drank a lot, and then when the Eagles got back together, he went to rehab and totally cleaned up. And just for the record, Joe says from the day he quit, he never touched it again. And I believe him. So now, with the Eagles seeming to be on the last leg of their long goodbye tour, have we heard the last of Joe Walsh? He's 76 years old, he's had some health issues, and he sure don't need the money. But is there something left inside his guitar needs to say? Let's first take a short look back at his life and solo career, then try and sort through the rumors and speculation to see if we can get an idea of what's to come. Joe was born on November 20th, 1947, in Wichita, Kansas. Joe's father was killed in a plane crash in Okinawa in July of 1949. His father was a flight instructor for the United States Air Force, so Joe never really knew him. He always said he grew up wondering what he would have been like. His mother remarried, and Joe said his stepfather always had his back. His guitar playing started at age 10 on a mail-order Silvertone guitar. The first song he learned to play was Walk Don't Run. His guitar playing would continue to improve, and he'd play in quite a few different cover bands through high school and his college years. But it wasn't until 1968 he really came into his own. This was when he joined the Cleveland, Ohio-based group called the James Gang. Besides getting his name out in the music business with the James Gang, Joe would also meet a very important person through them that would further his career then and later on. Their manager would put the gang in touch with ABC Records staff producer Bill Simzik, who got the group signed to ABC's new Blueswave Records subsidiary in January of 1969. Bill Simzik would later go on to produce the Eagles, and he would be the one who would go to bat for Joe when the Eagles were looking for a guitar player to replace Bernie Leadon. The Eagles had started to make the move over to the rock and roll scene after hiring guitarist Don Felder. But when Leadon's spot opened up, Bill knew just what the Eagles needed to get them on top. Bill Simzik knew music and told Glenn Frey and Don Henley that Joe was their man. But the James Gang is where the legend of Joe Walsh really started. Forced to play a gig, three-piece, because their other guitarists left them high and dry, they released their debut album titled Your Album in 1969. And then bass player Tom Criss quit. They got Dale Peters to come on board, and the group took on what I consider a much tighter sound. The James Gang's next two albums, both of which went gold, James Gang Rides Again in 1970 and Thirds in 1971, produced such classics as Funk 49 and Walk Away. After one more release, the album James Gang Live was to be Joe's final album, and he is to leave. Why Joe walked away from a band that had just come out with back-to-back gold albums? Joe said his reason for leaving was, well, it was a three-piece band. and I just got saturated with really playing loud and being like a kick-ass guitar guy, playing through Marshalls and stuff. I wanted to change directions. I think Joe was just hearing music in his head he couldn't produce with a three-piece group. So Joe quit the James Gang and left Cleveland and moved off to Colorado and started the band Barnstorm with Joe Vitale on drums, flute, and keyboards, and Kenny Passarelli on bass. Joe Walsh and Joe Vitale had previously played together in an Ohio-based band called the Measles before he joined the James Gang. Barnstorm was a band where all of the members contributed lead vocals and songs. Although Joe was still the principal singer and songwriter, they would eventually hire some more keyboard players to round the band out to 5 pieces. Joe and the band recorded a couple of great albums with Bill Simzik again at the controls over at Caribou Ranch. The studio was constructed out of a barn, and Joe was one of the first to record there. The first album, titled Barnstorm, and the next one, The Smoker You Drink, The Player You Get, came out, and the song Rocky Mountain Way hit the radio. But Joe again was getting restless. In 1974, him and his wife Stephanie had lost their little girl Emma in a tragic car accident, and his marriage never recovered after. And if you want to know a little more about Joe's life through this time, I've got another video about him that's a few years old, and I'll leave a link to it in the description box of this video. Joe would go on to join the Eagles with Bill Simzik, again throwing Joe's name out there, and this seemed to be a fit for him until the band broke up in 1980. After the breakup, he would go on to do some different musical projects, but basically, he just kept drinking and drugging at an alarming rate. Joe had stated he did not want to accept that the Eagles were over. Joe seemed to enjoy it more when his name was not out front. He always said he just wanted to be in a band. He never liked the way his bands were promoted, like the James Gang featuring Joe Walsh or Joe Walsh and Barnstorm. For some reason, that never set well with him. With the Eagles, there was none of that. But I will say, if anyone has ever went to see the Eagles after Joe had joined, you had to notice that Joe was the big focal point in that group. I know for myself, I always kept my eyes and ears on Joe. The guy was a very charismatic character. But over the years, it doesn't seem to bother him as much anymore being out front as it did back in the day. When the Eagles got back together, Joe was a total mess. And after talking to him, Joe says getting back with the Eagles was a good reason to clean up. And to his credit, after many years of hard drinking and drugging, Joe went to rehab and quit, and he never touched it again. He has been an Eagle now since December of 1975. And if Henley keeps dragging this long goodbye tour out much longer, Joe will have been with the Eagles for 50 years come December of 2025. He's the longest running member of the group next to Henley. But it looks like this will come to an end soon. So what will Joe do next? I've heard a number of things. One was him and his brother-in-law, Ringo Starr, have plans to put together a supergroup of all-stars and tour the country. I highly doubt that has any chance of happening. There's also been a few rumors that Joe and Don Felder have spoken, and they could team up for a few shows. This is also very unlikely, even though Joe and Don have both stated publicly that they are still friends. I'm sure Don will go along with this, but Joe will not cross Don Henley and the Eagles and work with Felder, who sued them. I just can't see that happening. Remember, Joe has been an Eagle for almost 50 years. I read somewhere Joe has new material and is working on one last album. This I can believe. And if his health holds up, he might tour solo, especially if he comes out with a new album. If you've heard any gossip on what might happen with Joe and his future musical plans, feel free to share them in the comments section. Here's a few more videos you might enjoy also. Thanks for watching.